Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Rob Dillingham this season. What does he have to do to earn a regular role? What's the best case scenario, especially in wake of a strong preseason performance on Monday night? It's all coming next. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. We are less than a week away from real life regular season Timberwolves basketball. Still two more preseason games to go, and still kind of reacting a bit in the wake of a strong performance from the Timberwolves bench and young players in their preseason win over the Lions, the team from China, on Monday. So we're going to talk a bit today about Rob Dillingham and what he needs to do to earn a role, what that could look like, why he's perhaps a bit behind in trying to earn a regular role. But in the wake of some of Chris Finch's comments recently, as well as following the game on Monday night, I think there's a real shot that Rob Dillingham can do enough to earn a somewhat regular role. So I want to break that down a little bit. We'll get into some of the lineups, obviously limited minutes, but what Dillingham was able to do last season, the lineups that he was most successful in. And then we'll also talk about ESPN did an NBA simulation, and it was, of course, just a random simulation, but kind of a nightmare scenario that played out a little bit like the worst case scenario in my mind of what this Timberwolves season could look like. I'll explain what I mean by that here a little bit later in the show today. First, though, a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube. It includes anywhere you like to listen to podcasts. And, of course, you can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right, of course, Rob Dillingham did not play much as a rookie, certainly not significant rotation minutes. And what I've kind of said all along, if you're not a regular listener, I'm not going to rehash the whole thing if you are, but my take on Rob Dillingham basically is what he did last season was too volatile on offense. And the biggest concern for Rob as an undersized 19-year-old one-and-done player who is the SEC Sixth Man of the Year at Kentucky and wasn't the primary concern for him, it wasn't on the offensive end coming out of Kentucky. It was, what's he going to be able to do defensively? Is he going to be able to hold up defensively? And honestly, we'll talk about the on-off numbers a little bit later in the show today. It wasn't great as a rookie, but honestly, I thought the compete level was really great there. I think that he tried hard on the defensive end, and that's such a huge part of the battle. Not to I guess he's going to catch a stray here, but like D'Angelo Russell, right? D'Angelo Russell's a big-bodied guard, never been a very good defender, but because of his size and his frame, and he's an intelligent player, he always should have been better than he has been defensively, but he doesn't work hard enough on the defensive end. That, at least to date, and albeit limited minutes and limited opportunities, that has not been the case for Rob Dillingham. He plays hard, he tries defensively, he fights through screens. Problem is he's like 165 pounds, and so he struggles to do that on a consistent basis. And he's not a I think he's an intelligent NBA player. I think he's got a high enough basketball IQ to succeed, but he's not quite there at the pro level yet. He hasn't seen enough. I think a good example of this would be Naz Reid. Obviously, different position. He's being asked to do different stuff. But I think of Naz Reid as an undrafted rookie out of LSU. He struggled defensively mightily his first couple of years. Didn't understand drop coverage. Didn't get the nuances of how he should go about defending at the NBA level. Different assignment, obviously, than Dillingham. But then it clicked eventually. The Wolves obviously have played more schemes that fit him a little bit better. Chris Finch's blitzing scheme early on when they tried to blitz pick and rolls on the perimeter. When Finch first started, Jared Vanderbilt was on the team, no Rudy Gobert. That was a much better fit for what Naz does. And Naz is better now in drop when he does play drop, although he plays more at the level now than, say, I guess Rudy did a lot more last year too. But you obviously use him a little bit different than a Rudy Gobert. He's a different type of defensive big. But early in his career, he just didn't click with what do I need to do defensively? How do I play with this pro defensive scheme against these high-level NBA athletes? And I think of that a little bit with Rob Dillingham. I don't think he's like the assignment, I think, is a little bit less complicated than a big in the defenses the Wolves have been asked, what they've asked their bigs to do over the years on defense. for Dillingham, it's mostly just like, hey, stick with the ball, right? Fight through screens, fight over screens, fight through screens. He's not super switchable, so they're not going to try and switch with him as much. But that's been kind of like, hey, can he hold his own on the defensive end? I think to this point, the answer is no, he hasn't been able to. But again, because he plays really hard and he is quick and he can, I think the steal rate's going to continue to improve. I'm encouraged actually there. The part that's concerning is the offense lag behind where it needed to. And we're going to get into the numbers here in the next segment. We'll talk about the offensive numbers actually were pretty good with Rob on the floor. It was the defensive numbers that weren't. But I expected his offensive impact to be even greater. And I guess the first point that I want to make then is that he's been more volatile. Again, limited minutes, to be clear. Like, how many games did he play? 40-some games. We're talking like, got the cleaning the glass numbers here. We're talking less than 900 possessions last season as a pro in his rookie season. So very limited overall sample size for Rob Dillingham. But what we saw, the high end was just as high as I think everyone expected it to be, and the low end was perhaps lower than people thought it would be on the offensive end. At the same time, the high end is so good. Actually, Matt Lloyd mentioned this on the pod or on the broadcast on Monday night when he joined Alan Horton in the booth on the call for the Timberwolves preseason game on Monday. Matt Lloyd, of course, the Timberwolves GM, so basically the top exec under Tim Conley in the front office, and he talked about what Rob Dillingham did to get the Timberwolves to win in Oklahoma City in February in that game where they were down 25 or whatever it was in the fourth quarter. The Wolves came all the way back, won in overtime, and Ant was initially benched because of the deficit, and then I think it was his ankle or something, and came back in briefly, and then they just had him sit the rest of the game. And Rob Dillingham was the one that led all of that. And Matt Lloyd brought that up somewhat unprompted. The conversation was prompted by Alan Horton to talk about Dillingham, obviously, but Lloyd was like, look, this is what he can do. And again, that's I talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show, the post-game pod from the Monday night preseason game, and making the point right now as well that the high end is really high for Rob Dillingham, and that's what's so enticing about what he can do when he's playing well on the offensive end. The problem is he's been indecisive and inconsistent on the offensive end of the floor, and that's what I really want to dig in on the show today is talk a little bit more about. Chris Finch had a quote, and I think it was a Chris Hine article with the Star Tribune that I want to read off here in just a minute, that really kind of underscores it. Actually it's separate from his post-game comments following the game on Monday, but Finch talked about this after Monday's game too, about the same kind of like the playing style he wants to see from Rob Dillingham and from really the young Timberwolves players and really the team more broadly, right? Like he wants them to play faster. And I want to talk about that quote when he was talking about the Wolves more broadly, and then also about Dillingham and how important pace is. And then also a little bit of the uphill battle of Dillingham fighting to find some of these minutes early in the season, and then with minutes, hopefully consistency that then could lead to more minutes. It's a bit of a chicken or the egg situation. How do you play well if you don't get the minutes to play well? But if you play and you don't play well, you don't get the minutes to try and play well, right? So it's a bit of, it's the unfair world that a fringe rotation guy is living in the NBA is trying to convince the coach that I should get these minutes, but you have to earn them to get them, but you can't earn them if you don't get them. And that's where Rob Dillingham's living right now. So I want to talk about the Finch quote and where that could be headed. And then we'll close by talking about that weird ESPN season simulation that they did. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Monarch Money. Most people cannot name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Simply put, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends, our title sponsors over at Gametime. Basketball season is officially here. Regular season starts in less than a week, and nothing beats being in the arena for the opening games. But let's be real. Getting tickets can be a total headache between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before you check out. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. And that's where Gametime comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NBA tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. Use Gametime to grab. The Timberwolves open on the road next week. They're in Portland. So if you happen to be on the West Coast, grab seats for the Wolves Blazers opener. Otherwise, the Timberwolves home opener is a week from Sunday against the Indiana Pacers. Still going to be a good team. Still going to be fun to watch. We saw them in preseason already. They're going to play fast. They're going to be a lot of fun. Go check out tickets at Gametime for Wolves Pacers, the home opener. My favorite thing about Gametime is the zone deals. They're an absolute game changer. You can pick the section you want. Gametime will pick your seats, but you save big. You can even find NBA tickets for under $25. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. All right, a few more notes on Rob Dillingham. So I wanted to read the Chris Finch quote. This is from the Chris Hine article at the Star Tribune that I think published on Tuesday. Finch's quote is when he was asked by Hine, like, hey, what have you told Rob Dillingham to focus on this season? And he said, quote, be ready to make shots off the ball, particularly when you're playing out there alongside guys like Julius, Randle, and Anthony Edwards, who are going to have the ball in their hands a lot. Keep it simple and use your speed, which is what we need you to do, and what you have naturally comes to you. And which is what we need you to do, and what you have naturally comes to you. Okay, so that's something Chris Finch has been preaching. And actually, I mentioned this earlier, but the post-game quote that he had on Monday following the Wolves win was about how the Wolves in general, and also Dillingham, played really well by just playing with pace, pushing the ball down the floor after misses and makes, really, for the opposing team. And something I've talked about a lot on the show is over the last couple of years, the Timberwolves are dead last in the NBA at running off of opponent missed shots, off of live defensive rebounds. The Timberwolves pace, their transition rate is dead last in the league, and it's not close. They actually are closer to middle of the pack when they run off of steals. They're more opportunistic when they turn opponents over. They try and score more in transition. Obviously, it's the best opportunity to score against a defense that's not set. You get to the rim more often, which means you get more free throws. You might get fouled before you even get to that point, clear path fouls, etc. And then obviously that's how you get your guys sprinting to the corner for an open three, or you get your trail threes or pull up in transition from a Terrence Shannon or an Anthony Edwards or Rob Dillingham. Those are all the best possible shots you can generate. And that's Rob Dillingham's best quality, is his speed. And then on top of that, obviously, he's a dynamic scorer and a really good shooter. And so Finch, anytime he's asked about Rob Dillingham, that's what he wants to talk about, is pushing the pace, playing faster, forcing the issue if you're Rob Dillingham. And as he says, though, what it comes natural to Rob Dillingham. And forcing the issue sounds bad, but because of his speed and his body control and his touch and his ability to score around guys and over guys, I think in transition, the Wolves want that. They would rather him make mistakes of aggression in the open floor. It's a little different than, hey, coming down and ISOing in the half court. I'm going to ISO this guy and not pass the ball once or whatever. Like, that's different. There was one shot like that. And again, he shot the ball 14 times on Monday, and there was one, maybe two shots that were questionable. I talked about this on yesterday's show, and it was like, I'm going to break this guy down to the left side of the floor and shoot a weird, like 19-foot fade bank shot from the left wing. Like, don't do that. Like, there's no reason to do that. But if you're going to push the pace in transition and try and score at the rim, even if you're taking on two guys and you might get fouled or whatever, or you force the issue, you kick it back out for a trail three, like, that's great. Even a pull-up three in transition might be an okay shot, depending on the time, game, time of game and all that stuff, the flow of the game overall. So, it obviously there's an element of, like, can he trust Rob Dillingham to do all of the above? Well, that's kind of the point, is they would rather have Dillingham make these mistakes of aggression in the open floor, push the pace, drive offense that way, than the alternative, which is to play slow, which is what Anthony Edwards tends to do. Ant slows things down. He likes to survey the floor. He likes to break guys down. He likes to shoot. He likes to walk into threes in transition. That's not how they want Anthony Edwards to play. Or excuse me, Rob Dillingham to play, or Anthony Edwards for that matter, but that's not how they want Rob Dillingham to play. The other thing I wanted to note was last year's lineups with Rob in them. So the Timberwolves, so Rob Dillingham played 892 possessions according to Cleaning the Glass. And overall, according to Cleaning the Glass, what any lineup with Rob Dillingham in them was 63rd percentile, plus 1.8 differential. Offensively, they were 118.5 points per 100 possessions. That's 79th percentile. So a really good, well above average offense. For context, here, let me pull the overall what the Timberwolves offense was. So that was 79th percentile, 118.5 points per 100 possessions. For context, the Timberwolves period were 68th percentile, a little under 117 points per 100 possessions. So they were slightly better with Rob Dillingham on the floor as an offense than they were when he was off the floor, which I think is notable. And it just goes to show with how raw and underdeveloped and again, volatile, inconsistent Rob Dillingham was last year. The offense was still a little bit better with him on the floor, albeit a much smaller sample size with Rob Dillingham than without Rob Dillingham. But defensively, with Rob Dillingham on the floor, they were just a 36th percentile unit, 116.7 points allowed per 100 possessions. So not great. Obviously, the defense was much better without him on the floor. I don't need to go through those numbers. I think that's pretty obvious. But what I did think was interesting is that virtually all of the best Rob Dillingham lineups included Rudy Gobert. And it's maybe not surprising. I think that Timberwolves intentionally tried to pair Dillingham with Gobert because it would help alleviate some of those concerns defensively, having Gobert on the back line if Dillingham gets beat. And obviously the pick and roll piece on the offense too is having Gobert as a screener for Rob Dillingham, who's a bit more diminutive, obviously. His top two most played in lineups included Gobert. One was a plus 23.5 and the other was a plus 41.7. And they were actually almost identical lineups. They were both two big lineups with Naz and Gobert. They both had Anthony Edwards and Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the lineup. One of them, they both had Nickeil Alexander-Walker and that's right. They both had Alexander Walker and Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert. One of them, his most used lineup, had Jaden McDaniels. His second most used had Anthony Edwards, but they both had Nickeil Alexander-Walker. In fact, every single one of Rob Dillingham's top eight lineups had Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the lineup, which I think is fascinating and notable. It also goes to show who's the de facto Nickeil Alexander-Walker replacement this year, at least sitting here right now. It's probably Terrence Shannon Jr., at least in terms of the minutes he's going to play in kind of a pseudo-nah role. So we're going to see Dillingham and TSJ together quite a bit. Also playing with two bigs. Of those 8 lineups, only one of them, and I guess this is pretty much just indicative of the overall front court rotation last year, only one of them didn't have two of Randle, Reid, and Gobert. And that was one that had Jaden McDaniels at the 4 and Terrence Shannon at the 3, interestingly enough, and no Anthony Edwards, and it was a slight positive. So all that to say, look for Dillingham to play a lot with Terrence Shannon and Rudy Gobert this year. So I may see Dillingham, Ant, Shannon, Naz, and Gobert. I think that's a solid lineup. Interestingly, he was never on the floor with both Randle and Gobert. I shouldn't say never. None of his top 10 lineups had Randle and Gobert on the floor. You have to go down to his 11th most used lineup. That was Randle and Gobert. So I'll be curious to see if that was intentional or just the way that the rotations worked out last year. But Chris Finch alluded to, or not alluded, he actually said in his quote that he needs to learn to play off the ball with some of these guys. So you have him on the floor with a TSJ, and maybe Terrence Shannon is initiating some of this offense. You have him on the floor with Ant. Ant's going to initiate some of this offense. You have him on the floor with Julius. Obviously, Julius is going to initiate a lot of the offense. And again, he didn't actually play that much with Julius Randle last year. And for the most part, he and Randle together played really well. So I think that's pretty notable. And we'll just have to keep an eye on how those lineups shake out. The last Dillingham note is the on-off stuff at Cleaning the Glass. Dillingham was defensively, with the on-off numbers, the worst Timberwolves defensive player. Or another way to say it, the team's defense was worse with him on than with anybody else. So he was 10th percentile. Opponent offenses were a plus 5.8 per 100 possessions when Rob Dillingham was on the floor. Offensively, that number is a lot better. It's not great. Actually, it is really good. It's probably like 6th on the team. He was 69th percentile. The Timberwolves offense was when Dillingham was on the floor. So overall, his net on off was well below zero, but so were a lot of guys, and a lot of that has to do with volume of minutes played and all that stuff. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's pretty noisy, but I thought it was interesting to point out that the on-off did not like his defense last season. And that is all going to factor in to how Chris Finch handles the rotation this season. All right, let's close by talking a little bit about this. We'll move on from Dillingham and talk about this ESPN simulation, which in a lot of ways, I think is a realistic worst case scenario for this Timberwolves season. I'll explain what I mean by that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is headed into week 7, believe it or not. Very hard to believe. And FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers could bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Thursday Night Football this week is actually a pretty interesting matchup. We got Steelers at Bengals, got Aaron Rodgers on a short week, and the Steelers are favored by 5.5 points at Cincinnati. I'm actually pretty sure when I did the show yesterday, the line might have been 4.5. 5.5 feels like a lot. I would probably go Bengals plus 5.5. They were frisky on the road against the Packers on Sunday. Big catch by Jamar Chase. They've obviously got Joe Flacco playing for them, which is probably better than Jake Browning. Even with no Joe Burrow, I think against an older team like the Steelers on the road, I kind of think interdivisional game too. So I think taking a home underdog plus 5.5, getting those points there, I don't mind that at all. So I'd go Cincinnati plus 5.5 on Thursday night. You could also live bet the game. You could go with the same game parlay, whatever it is. If there's one primetime game like that on, it's a ton of fun to do either one of those things. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel will make the game day experience so much better for you. It makes watching football that much more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, closing today's show by talking about this ESPN NBA season simulation. It doesn't say if this was like a 2K simulation, like they'll say with the Madden one that they do for football. So I don't know if this is just like Kevin Pelton's own simulation that he uses to simulate 1,000 outcomes or whatever every year. This is written by Kevin Pelton, so it could be his own deal, but I don't know. It doesn't specify. Either way, they picked a random simulation, which is, I guess, fine, but also you're going to get wonky outcomes if you do that, right? So they picked simulation number 620, and then he even says chosen because of its interesting outcomes. So here we are. Perhaps not surprising, the Timberwolves are, we'll say big losers, but they're losers in this simulation. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It's obviously pretty fascinating. The first thing that's notable is they go through the NBA Cup, and the Timberwolves are in a difficult group. They're in the same group as OKC. They've, of course, not advanced to the tournament portion at all over the first couple of seasons of the NBA Cup. The I guess slightly different versions in the first couple of years of the NBA Cup. And in this simulation, the Timberwolves beat the Thunder in the quarterfinals after making it to the tournament, and then lose in the semifinals, which of course are in Vegas, to the Trailblazers as a 4 seed. So for whatever that's worth, and it's not worth much, a simulation of the NBA Cup, but that's what happens to the Wolves in this simulation. A reminder that so this is where I think it's a little bit, it's kind of realistic. It's got the Timberwolves record on Christmas or through Christmas at 16-10. Which is tied for third in the Western Conference with, surprisingly, Portland behind OKC, and Golden State actually has 20 wins in this simulation, OKC 19. So Golden State at 20 is feels like a lot. But as by the way, we talked about this. Kevin Pelton had Golden State, I think, 2 in the West in his rankings that he did about a week ago. And again, like the top end version of a healthy Steph Curry and a healthy Jimmy Butler, yeah, that's possible. But I worry about the real rotation minutes. We talked about this pretty extensively on our Locked On NBA Western Conference squad show preview that I think comes out at some point this week that we recorded over the weekend. Talked a lot about like how top heavy is this Golden State team, and is that quality depth that's really going to help them as they encounter. And my thing is like, hey, what's the average number of games that Steph and Jimmy have played? Without looking it up, what is it, 65, 70 max? It's probably in the 60s games played for Jimmy and Steph. what happens when these guys are missing games at the same time, or you've only got one of them on the court? They're obviously still a good team. They're still a playoff team, but are they a top 2-3 seed in the West? Probably not when it's all said and done. Anyway, in this simulation at Christmas time, they have 20 wins. OKC is 19, and Minnesota and Portland each have 16. And in my bold predictions that I did shortly after the schedule came out, I had Minnesota with 24 wins at the end of December. So this is another 5-6 days on top of the ESPN projection. But the point here is they've got Minnesota tied for third in the West, and I have Minnesota first in the West at the end of the calendar year, because the schedule is not relatively, ridiculously easy, quote unquote easy, because we don't know exactly until we get rolling how good or bad these teams are. But they play over the first, October, November, December. Minnesota plays the Pelicans, the Jazz, and the Kings twice each. They only play 2 total games against teams like Boston and OKC. Like combine those, and obviously Boston's not the same, but like thinking about like finals teams, right? Finals, conference finals types teams. They only play 3 games against the LA teams combined. The Clippers and Lakers will both be good. They don't have a long West Coast swing. They start on the West Coast with 2 games, and they only have 4 back-to-backs, period, in the first 2.5 months of the season. And then they get to January, they get 4 back-to-backs, and the schedule gets a lot tougher. But my bold prediction was Minnesota's 24-7 when we get to New Year's Day. The end of the calendar year, they're 24-7. And this ESPN projection has them tied for third in the West on Christmas. But then things start to slide. So at the All-Star break in this projection, Minnesota's 7th, tied in wins with Houston and just ahead of Phoenix. And then you get to April and they're 40-35. And in this projection, they are still 7th, tied with Houston. And then at the end of the season, they're still tied with Houston, and they lose a tiebreaker in this simulation and then fall into the play-in, which, of course, they just avoided last year with the 6th seed. Remember, it came down to the last weekend of the year. They avoid the play-in, they get the 6th, and they beat the Lakers handily in the first round as a 6th seed. In this simulation, they lose the tiebreaker, they fall to 7, and then they lose to Portland at home, of course, as the 7th seed. But remember, it's essentially a 3-game tournament at that point, so you lose, you get another crack at it as the 7. But in this simulation, the Kings as the 10 beat the Suns, and then the Kings as a 10 seed go on the road and beat Minnesota as the 7 seed, and Minnesota falls out of the playoffs without technically making it, like losing 2 play-in games. And in this simulation, apparently losing on a DeMar DeRozan buzzer beater. Take that for what it's worth. And then, to make matters even worse, to rub salt in this wound, the Timberwolves win the draft lottery in this simulation, but they owe a pick swap to Utah. Now, the pick swap in this simulation, Minnesota still gets 5 because Utah was bad and they get the 5 pick or the 5 seed anyway. But by falling out of the play-in, the Wolves are then part of the lottery and have to swap with Utah if the Jazz finish ahead of Minnesota. So Utah gets the Wolves pick at 1 and the Wolves would pick at 5. So it's quite the simulation. I do think this is a reasonable worst case scenario, right? Setting aside injuries and things that that can't be controlled, right? The schedule's so easy early on that's a reasonable way for that to shake out. I just the issue I have here is like Golden State wins 63 games and OKC wins 58. They've got Memphis at 51 wins. I don't see how Memphis wins 51 games this year. They're not going to be 7 games better than Minnesota. Again, setting health aside, we just don't know. Although I think in that sense, we could include health. It's part of the reason I don't think Memphis wins 51 games. How is that team going to stay healthy enough between and I hope these guys stay healthy, but John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., are these guys going to be healthy enough? No Desmond Bane on this team anymore to win 50 plus games. So obviously anything can happen. And this simulation isn't completely out of left field, but I think that's kind of the worst case scenario. I mean, Minnesota was 7 games worse last year than the year before in the regular season, 49 regular season wins. The simulation has them at 44. It's certainly a possibility. I just don't think it's a very likely outcome. And that's a good thing. But anyway, I do think they're going to get off to a really good start this year. The question is going to be, is it sustainable as things get more difficult? The schedule gets tougher. There's more back-to-backs. There's more travel once the calendar flips to 2026. So those are all things we'll have to keep an eye on. All right. That's all I got for you today. Of course, the Timberwolves have another preseason game on Thursday night. On Thursday's show, we're going to dig in a little bit on something that Matt Moore from Locked On Nuggets talked about in the Western Conference preview show. And that was the Timberwolves, the success that their best lineups, their Rudy Gobert lineups, had against the Thunder in the conference finals. I want to dig in on that comment a little bit some of the lineup data, some of the stuff that from last year's playoffs. So we didn't spend a ton of time on post playoffs, but just how good the Wolves' best lineups were throughout the postseason, and what happened and why they didn't use those lineups against OKC as much as they should have in the conference finals, as they, in the words of Matt Moore, mismanaged that series. So I want to talk about that on tomorrow's show. And then, of course, Friday will be the post-game pod following Thursday night's preseason game against the Chicago Bulls. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder that for your second listen, go check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Show with our guy, Josh Lloyd. He hosts the #1 fantasy basketball podcast, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, this show is also part of that very same Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.